Sir Keir Starmer is facing a growing rebellion from up to 100 of his own MPs as many reject his stance on the Israel-Gaza conflict.
Senior figures in the party, including London Mayor Sadiq Khan, Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham and Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar, have demanded an immediate ceasefire in the region, putting them at odds with their leader. Starmer has called for a humanitarian pause in Gaza, but stopped short of opposing Israel's planned ground invasion. Well, joining us now...
Israel has the right to defend herself, and obviously there are hostages still being held. But whatever action is taken has to be in accordance with international law. I think that's a very clear framework, and Israel is bound by that international law.
Well, joining us now is TalkTV's chief political commentator, Peter Cardwell. A lot of people might at one point have been tempted to praise Sir Keir Starmer for at least sticking to his guns when it comes to what we anticipate could well be the next Prime Minister, sending a clear message about this country's stance when it comes to the Israel-Gaza conflict. Do you think he's likely to shift in the wake of this rebellion?
I think it's not out of the question that he shifts. He's certainly under pressure, and I think this is probably the biggest crisis of his leadership so far. He's known as flip-flopping Starmer. He has changed his mind on a number of things, but on this particular one, he's really weighing up quite a number of things. One is, it also gets into the nature of the ceasefire itself. I mean, is that something that's pro-Israeli or anti-Israeli? Certainly the Israelis would say they don't want a ceasefire because A, they can't negotiate with terrorists in Hamas, and secondly, that they can't trust Hamas to have a ceasefire even if they wanted one. But there are a lot of people, including behind the scenes Shabnam Mahmood, who's the only Muslim shadow cabinet minister. She is asking him to change his mind. And then, of course, you have very powerful figures. You mentioned Andy Burnham there, Sadiq Khan as well, who may well say, well, we have executive power. We are elected mayors. We're not going to take orders from Keir Starmer, who's not been elected to the leadership of this country yet. He might be. But, I mean, there's certainly reporting that Keir Starmer specifically asked Sadiq Khan, don't go public with this, don't say this, and Sadiq Khan did it anyway. So what is the sort of strength of his leadership? There's also not just the 100 MPs. There's also about 20 Labour-run councils, more than that, and 9 of them in Andy Burnham's constituency, or his area, certainly of Manchester, which is a heavily Muslim area, heavily Jewish area as well. So it's a real crisis, I think, for his leadership. What he does next is very interesting. And of course, this conflict is not going to go away. And there are lots and lots of, very sadly, deaths and big questions to come, because a lot of people, a lot of senior politicians said, as he said, Israel has the right to defend itself after the terrorism of Hamas. But as the conflict gets more complicated as time goes on, these questions will come for both him and other political leaders.
I mean, the thing about Keir Starmer is if you don't like his opinions, he has others. A well-known obsessive flip-flopper, and he's under intense pressure here. Now, I had an imam on my show last week who said, let me make this clear. He said, unless Keir Starmer joins the call for a ceasefire, he will lose every single Muslim vote in this country. There are 5 million Muslims in this country. There are fewer than 300,000 Jewish people. And I suspect that Mr Starmer, I'm hearing that Keir is edging towards another flip-flop, that he will call for a ceasefire. And the reason for that will be numerical. Fewer than 300,000 Jews, 5 million Muslims,
so
more votes in it for him. But the problem, now, I don't call for a ceasefire, but it's a perfectly reasonable position to have for anyone to say, stop the killing of innocent civilians. Nobody wants that. And if you want to call for a ceasefire for that reason, it's entirely legitimate. The problem for Keir Starmer and Labour is the moment he does that, it looks anti-Semitic.
Well, that's interesting. I don't think you can... I think you're absolutely right in terms of a ceasefire. It can mean many different things to many different people. And certainly, I don't think any imam speaks to for all 5 million Muslims in this country, many of whom don't vote Labour. But there is a very good point with
Most of them do, though.
Well, I mean, quite a lot of them do, but not all of them. I don't think any imam can talk for 5 million people. It's very interesting from Keir Starmer in terms of where he is in this, because he's cleaned up the Labour Party in the last 4 years. There is still anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, but it's not nearly as bad as it was previously under Jeremy Corbyn. So the question for him, and I think the question for people like us commentating on this as well, is this an electoral calculation or is this a matter of principle?
You say they've cleaned up the anti-Semitism, but Sir Keir Starmer has failed to condemn his own MPs chanting from the river to the sea at Saturday's protest. That includes John McDonnell, Andy McDonald and Ian Lavery. That is clearly an anti-Semitic chant.
Well,
They've been doing this.
Just to be clear, John McDonnell didn't say that. It was Andy McDonald, who is a former, who is a Labour MP and is a Corbynist, and certainly he used that phrase, which to many people is very, very offensive, because it essentially calls for Israel to be wiped off the map.
Yeah.
And John McDonald backed up Andy McDonald, and certainly Keir Starmer hasn't condemned him yet. That, again, I think shows Keir Starmer's weakness in all of this, in that if he starts going out condemning Corbynista MPs, even for saying very deeply offensive things, well, his own position could be in jeopardy.
It's terrifying. This man could be leading the country in a year.
Yeah, I mean, that is the point. As I say, there's no problem for whether you're a Tory, Labour, Muslim, Jew, whatever. There's no problem saying I call for a ceasefire because I can't stand to see innocent civilians die. And that is a terrible tragedy. But such is the mess that Corbyn got the Labour Party into, that Starmer, if he stands up and says that, the Jewish community will go, there they go again, anti-Semites having a go at the Jews.
As if Benjamin Netanyahu is sitting there thinking, I wonder what Andy McDonald, the Labour backbencher, thinks. Should I go for a ceasefire or not? Yeah. I wonder what Keir Starmer thinks, or Sadiq Khan. It kind of doesn't matter. The Israelis are going to do what they want to do.
Exactly.
Yes, they can be pressured by the Americans, perhaps. They can be maybe pressured by a little bit by Rishi Sunak, but I don't think so. And actually, this is a very important political row for Keir Starmer. It's important politically in this country. But in terms of whether or not there is a ceasefire in Israel, it's completely by the by.
They're not waiting for Keir Starmer to get on the blower and tell them.
No, exactly right. I mean,
why should they?
There's this massive difference, this huge schism, gulf between the sort of international debating society. Oh, they really should call a ceasefire. Oh, no more deaths. And what is actually happening? Right. Israel not even remotely listening. So last week, it was a sort of international joke with all these bleeding heart liberals and the EU and France saying, oh, you've got to stop. Israel not even remotely listening to a word of it.
You're absolutely right, Kevin. Israel has always done its own thing and always will do its own thing. OK, yes, it has a lot of international support from America. It is its closest ally. It is incredibly important. But also, I think that they also have very strong leadership from Benjamin Netanyahu. He's been criticised a lot for a lot of things, including not meeting families of the hostages. I'm going to be interviewing the Israeli ambassador about that at 3 o'clock. But there are all sorts of aspects to this. And I think that you're absolutely right that Benjamin Netanyahu is not thinking, oh, actually, what does Keir Starmer think?
But, I would say that the West's geopolitical failures have helped contribute to this situation. There's been a lot of discussion about Iran's hand in all of this. Now, I looked up some of the trade figures, first of all, for the EU, who trade with Iran like nobody's business, especially Germany. So I thought, I wonder what we've been doing in the UK. Last year, trade with Iran increased over 60%. Guess what we've been sending them? Mechanical goods, nuclear reactors and chemicals. Oh, wow. I mean, it makes a mockery of geopolitical strategy.
Well, it's aid to Hamas as well in Gaza that we need to look at. I mean, people are saying, isn't it dreadful that Israel is stopping water and electricity getting to Gaza? Well, maybe it is, but at the same time, why? There's plenty of water, and there should be for all those people. There should be plenty of energy. There should be in the infrastructure there. When you give money to Hamas, do they spend it on schools? Do they spend it on hospitals? No, they spend it on weapons.
They've been digging up the water pipes to fire rockets out of them.
Exactly.
By the way, can someone tell Keir Starmer that just giving a ceasefire a new name won't get him out of this rabbit hole? He now he's calling for humanitarian pauses. That's a ceasefire. So let's assume, on the off chance, about a sort of 0.001%, Keir Starmer shows some backbone and sticks to his stance and refuses to call for a ceasefire. What effect could that have?
Well, I think that there'll be a greater call from many Labour MPs. I mean, he hasn't said that he is going to discipline anybody, even members of his shadow ministerial team who have called for this. He's not in a position where he can do that. Government and leadership is by consent. And if you have a lot of people who agree with you on most things, and actually, this is such a contrast from 3 weeks ago when I was up in Liverpool at the Labour Party conference where there was iron discipline and basically everybody was singing from the same hymn sheet. This has disintegrated quite quickly for Keir Starmer. I think it's the biggest crisis of his leadership.
He certainly went against my advice not to be interviewed by you. But well, thank you, Peter. That's Peter Cardwell, the TalkTV political editor.